One wrong decision, one ignored warning. That's all it took to turn sudden fortune into the 6 most horrifying lottery winner deaths ever documented. These aren't just tragic stories. They're reminders that wealth can't buy safety, and the biggest risk is losing sight of danger. It was September 14, 2015, when Colby Jensen, a 33-year-old former warehouse supervisor turned lottery winner, arrived at his hillside construction site just outside a quiet rural town. Colby had always been the hands-on type, impulsive and eager to dive into projects without waiting for others. His recent windfall had given him the confidence to purchase property and build his dream home on a steep embankment overlooking the valley. The site foreman, a 48-year-old veteran named Ray, who had spent decades in excavation work, was known for his cautious, by-the-book approach. That morning, Ray had walked the perimeter multiple times, noting the fresh tension cracks spiderwebbing across the exposed clay face. The night before, heavy rain had saturated the hillside, turning the soil into a heavy, unstable mass. Ray had already ordered shoring panels, but they wouldn't arrive until later that afternoon. He placed caution tape around the cut and instructed his crew to stay clear. Working the compact excavator was a 41-year-old operator named Derek, efficient and focused on the task at hand. He carefully trimmed wet soil from the base of the cut, trying to square it off for the planned garage expansion. Each bucket load revealed darker, wetter clay beneath. Water seeped from the face in thin streams, and fine material began to crumble onto the excavation floor. When Colby arrived that morning, he parked his SUV near the edge of the excavation, well within the failure zone despite the tape barrier. The added weight of the vehicle created additional pressure on the already compromised slope. Ray tried to wave him back, but Colby was already out of the truck, tape measure in hand, eager to discuss moving a proposed doorway opening about 18 inches to the left. Colby ducked under the caution tape and stepped into the cut. Ray shouted for him to stay back, but Colby waved him off, insisting it would only take a moment. Derek had just finished an undercut about 4 feet deep when a low, crackling sound echoed from the slope. The face bulged outward at mid-height. A vertical crack opened across roughly 10 feet of exposed clay. For several tense seconds, the slope held firm, the crack widening with a low groan before the entire upper bench suddenly let go. The upper bench collapsed. Over 11,000 pounds of saturated soil slid down, striking concrete blocks. 2 blocks toppled onto Colby, crushing his left side and back. He went down hard against a sawhorse. The soil mass buried his lower body, crushing his pelvis and abdomen. 1 block compressed his chest. The impact forced the air from his lungs in an audible gasp. His ribs fractured, and his chest wall moved in an unnatural rhythm as he struggled to breathe. His legs, pinned beneath tons of wet clay, began to swell rapidly. His shoes were forced off by the pressure. Ray and Derek worked frantically, using their hands to pull away blocks while watching the face for further movement. Colby's breathing became shallow, then irregular. His skin turned pale. Within minutes, he stopped breathing entirely. Emergency responders arrived and carefully stabilized the slope with timber panels before completing the extrication. Colby had no detectable pulse. His pelvis and both femurs were fractured. The investigation cited inadequate shoring, rain saturation, and the dangerous placement of Colby's vehicle as contributing factors. It was June 12, 2016, when Taryn McKinley, a 29-year-old marketing coordinator who had recently won the lottery, decided to take her newly purchased motorboat out for a weekend at a quiet lakeside marina. Taryn was sociable and enthusiastic, eager to learn boating, but her hands-on experience was still limited. That morning, she trailered the boat to a rented slip and sought help from a 24-year-old dockhand named Kyle. He was friendly and helpful, but had never received formal training in safety procedures. He showed Taryn the basic controls of the windlass system used to raise and lower the anchor, pointing out the deck switch and mentioning the circuit breaker below, but he didn't emphasize keeping the road clear or locking out the power. Taryn's friend Jessica, a 31-year-old graphic designer with an upbeat personality, came along to help with lines and take photos. Neither woman had much boating experience. On a nearby slip, a 67-year-old retired angler named Robert was organizing his tackle box. Robert was meticulous and safety-minded, and he glanced over occasionally as the women prepared. The anchor rod lay loosely coiled on the deck near the bow. A section formed a loop that rested near Taryn's right ankle as she stood by the bow roller. The windlass breaker had been left energized after maintenance, and the deck foot switch lacked a protective guard. She pressed the down control. The windlass motor engaged, and the chain began feeding over the bow roller. A twist in the rod suddenly caused a slack loop to tighten. Within seconds, the loop cinched around Taryn's right ankle. The windlass continued turning, and the tension pulled her forward toward the roller. Taryn fell sideways, her right leg levering hard against the metal roller. An audible snap echoed across the deck as her tibia and fibula broke. Blood marked the fiberglass surface. Kyle hesitated, unsure whether to hit the breaker or the deck switch. The line kept feeding. Jessica screamed for him to shut it off. Taryn's left knee struck a cleat with brutal force, opening a deep laceration that exposed the joint capsule. Blood pooled near the opening. The remaining rod continued to pay out, and the anchor dropped into the water. The line pulled taut, dragging Taryn fully overboard. Her entangled ankle remained under high tension beneath the pulpit. Kyle, panicking, hit what he thought was the stop button but accidentally pressed the up control. The windlass reversed momentarily, jamming the line even tighter around Taryn's ankle and increasing the constriction. Jessica grabbed a pocket knife and tried desperately to cut the wet synthetic line, but the smooth blade barely scratched the surface. Robert, hearing the commotion, rushed over and located the breaker panel. He flipped the switch, cutting power to the windlass. The line stopped moving, but Taryn did not resurface. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. They used a boat hook to create slack in the line and carefully freed her ankle. When they pulled Taryn from the water, she was unresponsive with no breathing or pulse. Her right lower leg showed severe circumferential crush injury with a tourniquet effect that had cut off circulation. The open knee wound was still bleeding. Water was present in her airways. Resuscitation efforts on the dock were unsuccessful. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as drowning with contributory traumatic entrapment injuries. It was February 9th, 2017, when Elliot Graves, a 45-year-old former accountant turned lottery winner, arrived at a mid-rise commercial building he had recently purchased for redevelopment. Elliot was methodical and hands-on, insisting on personally inspecting every aspect of his properties. He had built a reputation among contractors for showing up unannounced and asking detailed questions about every phase of construction. The general contractor leading the tour was a 52-year-old veteran named Richard, known for his strict adherence to safety protocols. Richard had explicitly instructed everyone to stay with the group and avoid the elevator lobbies. The freight elevator had been decommissioned weeks earlier pending inspection. A 37-year-old carpenter named Tom had stretched caution tape across the elevator lobby entrance and hung a handwritten sign that says, "Out of service." However, no hard barricades had been installed yet due to budget constraints. Temporary lighting illuminated the main corridor, but the elevator lobby remained dim with shadows obscuring the doorway. The interlock mechanism on the freight elevator doors was defective and had been bypassed during earlier work. No mechanical locks had been installed to prevent the doors from opening. As the group moved through the third floor, Elliot stepped ahead. He ducked under the caution tape and approached the outer freight door. The metal door slid partially open with a metallic scrape despite the sign. It was a single-slide freight door, the kind that moved horizontally on rollers, not the safer center-opening passenger type, which made it easier to force open even with the interlock bypassed. Behind it was darkness. The inner gate was missing entirely. The hoistway was completely open. The threshold appeared flush with the corridor floor, creating a deceptive sense of continuity. Elliot leaned forward, peering into the darkness to locate the elevator car. He placed his right foot across the threshold. There was no car. His weight shifted forward into the void. He fell immediately, dropping vertically through the shaft. His clothing brushed against the guide rails as he descended. The fall covered multiple floors before impact. He struck the pit area near the counterweight buffers at the bottom. The impact was catastrophic. Both legs showed severe deformities consistent with bilateral femur fractures. His pelvis was visibly misaligned. His chest had sustained massive trauma with multiple rib fractures. Deep lacerations across his scalp bled heavily onto the concrete pit floor. Richard and Tom rushed to the opening. Tom blocked the area and shone a flashlight down into the shaft. There was no movement visible from above. No sounds of breathing or calls for help echoed up from the darkness. Richard radioed for emergency services immediately, his voice steady despite the shock. Technical rescue teams arrived with specialized equipment. They installed a tripod anchor system at the shaft opening and descended on ropes to reach the pit. When they reached Elliot, there were no vital signs, no pulse, no respirations, no response. They carefully packaged his body in a rescue basket and extracted him through the lobby level. The scene investigation documented the defective and bypassed interlock system, the missing inner gate, and the inadequate access control that relied solely on caution tape rather than physical barriers. The medical examiner's report listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force injuries, including fatal cranial, thoracic, and pelvic trauma from a fall into an elevator shaft. It was November 18th, 2017, when Jenna Whitlow, a 36-year-old former retail manager turned lottery winner, spent the afternoon working in her suburban home garage on a cabinet refinishing project. Jenna was energetic and organized, the type of person who threw herself enthusiastically into DIY projects. She had been renovating her newly purchased home for months, tackling most of the work herself, with occasional help from contractors. The garage had become her workshop. New cabinetry supplies were stacked along one wall, along with several cans of solvent-based wood finishes and stains. A portable space heater sat in the corner, running on high to help dry the freshly applied finishes in the cold November air. The garage door was only half open to retain heat, which severely limited ventilation. Earlier that day, a 39-year-old handyman named Ray had helped Jenna hang some of the cabinets. Ray was careful but informal in his approach, and he had used an electric sander to smooth rough edges, creating fine sawdust that settled across the workspace. Before leaving, he had reminded Jenna to be careful with the finishing products, but he hadn't specifically addressed proper disposal of the oil-soaked rags. A neighbor across the street, a 58-year-old woman named Zia, who was attentive to everything happening on the block, had complained earlier in the week about strong chemical odors drifting from Jenna's garage. Zia had considered calling to mention it, but decided against interfering. After Ray left, Jenna continued applying oil-based stain to several cabinet doors. She used multiple rags, saturating them with the product. When she finished, she tossed the oil-soaked rags into a plastic bin near the heater. Fire code required such rags to be stored in a metal container with a self-closing lid, but Jenna was unaware of this requirement. The plastic bin had no lid at all. The interior door connecting the garage to the kitchen was propped open, so Jenna could easily move back and forth for tools and supplies. This created a direct flow path between the two spaces. Several solvent containers sat nearby, with their lids not fully tightened after use. Extension cords ran under a rubber mat to power the heater and work lights. As the afternoon progressed, a slow exothermic reaction began inside the pile of oil-soaked rags. The oxidation process generated heat. The temperature inside the bin steadily rose. Thin wisps of smoke began to appear at the rim. By then, the internal temperature inside the rag pile had likely surpassed 180 degrees Fahrenheit, the point where oxidation accelerates rapidly toward spontaneous ignition. The space heater cycled on, and its airflow pushed heated air directly across the bin and toward the open solvent containers. The airflow created a convection path, drawing air through the propped-open kitchen doorway and feeding fresh oxygen to the growing fire. Ignition occurred suddenly. Small flames erupted from the rag bin and spread immediately to the cardboard boxes stacked beside it. Within seconds, the flames reached the vapor space near the open solvent containers. A brief deflagration sent a flash of fire across the ceiling and down through the open doorway into the kitchen. Jenna had just stepped into the garage threshold, carrying a screwdriver. The flash ignited her clothing at the front. She turned instinctively toward the kitchen sink area. Flames spread rapidly across her shirt and up toward her hair and neck. Partial thickness burns formed on her anterior torso and upper limbs. Her hair ignited. Smoke thickened rapidly in the enclosed space. The temperature spiked as the fire transitioned into a full flashover. Heat radiated intensely from the ceiling toward the doorway. Jenna tried to move toward the exterior side door, but a cabinet panel that had been leaning against the wall fell, blocking her path. Burning debris from the softened door header fell, striking her shoulder and causing a deep laceration and additional blunt trauma. She staggered back toward the interior doorway. A light fixture dropped from the ceiling, landing near her feet and causing contact burns to her lower legs. Zia saw the flicker of flames through the garage window and immediately called emergency services while running toward the house. She shouted Jenna's name but received no response. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They advanced a hose line and knocked back the flames in the garage. Thick black smoke poured from the half-open garage door. Once the fire was controlled, they found Jenna near the interior threshold between the garage and kitchen. Soot was visible around her mouth and nose. Her nasal hairs were singed, clear indicators of airway involvement and inhalation injury. Paramedics initiated resuscitation efforts immediately. Her injuries were extensive. Severe thermal burns across her torso, arms, and face, combined with significant inhalation injury from superheated gases and toxic smoke. She was transported rapidly, but she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to the combined effects of thermal injury, inhalation injury, and blunt trauma from falling debris. The fire investigation documented multiple violations. The oil-soaked rags had been improperly stored in a plastic bin without a metal self-closing container. Ventilation was grossly inadequate, with the garage door only half open. The space heater had been positioned dangerously close to combustible materials. The open interior door had created a flow path that accelerated the fire's spread into the living space. Melted extension cord plugs showed evidence of heat damage at the connections. Ray provided a statement confirming the finishing products used and the rag disposal method. Zia's timeline and observations were recorded. The cause of death was listed as complications of thermal and inhalation injuries following a garage flashover caused by spontaneous combustion of improperly stored oily rags. It was April 22, 2018, when Parker Vaughn, a 52-year-old former software engineer turned lottery winner, spent the afternoon in his basement wine room working on his newest hobby, small batch winemaking. Parker was reserved and meticulous, approaching every project with careful planning. The wine room was sealed with a self-closing door and minimal ventilation. An HVAC technician named Derek had previously advised Parker that the room needed better air circulation, especially with multiple active fermentations producing carbon dioxide. Inside, several large glass carboys were fermenting. The process naturally released significant amounts of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, and in a confined space with poor ventilation, it settles at floor level, gradually displacing oxygen. A carbon dioxide monitor sat on a shelf near the door, but its low battery indicator had been flashing for days. Parker had disabled the audible alarm function weeks earlier because the beeping annoyed him. The door had a self-closing mechanism with a latch that engaged fully when shut. Parker usually propped it open with a rubber wedge, but the wedge had been misplaced. Outside the wine room, Parker had placed a cooler containing dry ice to pre-chill bottles. The cooler lid was slightly ajar. Dry ice is solid carbon dioxide, and as it sublimates, it releases gas that drifts along the floor. That afternoon, Parker entered the wine room carrying 2 fresh carboys. The self-closing door swung shut behind him. He set the carboys down and knelt beside a fermentation vessel to adjust a dripping spigot. As he knelt, his elbow bumped the cooler just outside, nudging the lid further open. The rate of sublimation increased, and visible fog began rolling along the floor toward the gap under the door. The heavy gas flowed into the room, adding to the already elevated levels from fermentation. Within minutes, the concentration at floor level became dangerously high. Parker's coordination likely began to deteriorate as the oxygen levels dropped. Investigators later noted that the position of his body suggested he had tried to brace himself against the rack before losing consciousness. His breathing would have quickened in the oxygen-poor air, drawing in even more carbon dioxide from the lowest layer. Evidence indicated that he collapsed gradually, his face ending up close to the floor where the gas was densest. There were no signs of convulsions or struggle. consistent with a rapid loss of consciousness caused by carbon dioxide asphyxiation. Parker's housekeeper, a 46-year-old woman named Linda, arrived later that afternoon. She called out, but received no response. After completing her upstairs routine, she went to the basement. The wine room door was closed, which was uncommon. She tried the handle and found it latched. She pushed harder and the door opened. Parker was lying on the floor near the fermentation rack. Linda immediately called emergency services. When paramedics arrived, they used a gas meter to check the air quality. The meter indicated elevated carbon dioxide levels in the hallway and significantly higher concentrations inside the room at floor level. Responders found Parker unresponsive with no breathing, no pulse, and no response to stimuli. His skin was pale with no burns or signs of physical trauma. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. The scene investigation revealed the non-functional monitor with its dead battery and disabled alarm. The rubber wedge was found under a storage rack. The dry ice in the cooler had nearly completely sublimated. The multiple active fermentation vessels were documented. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as environmental asphyxiation due to carbon dioxide accumulation in a confined space. It was August 13, 2016, when Delaney Rhodes, a 41-year-old former nonprofit director turned lottery winner, arrived at a community fairground to oversee final preparations for a concert she had sponsored. Delaney was outgoing and confident, deeply involved in local community affairs. She had used part of her lottery winnings to fund the event. The temporary stage and lighting truss had been erected earlier that day. The stage lead was a 44-year-old man named Kevin, efficient and schedule-driven. A thunderstorm had passed through earlier, leaving the ground damp and soft. Intermittent gusts continued to sweep across the open fairground. Working alongside Kevin was a volunteer coordinator named Sarah, a 38-year-old organized woman who managed crowd flow. Among the early attendees was an off-duty paramedic named James, a 35-year-old attentive professional positioned near the front barrier. The vertical truss supporting the lighting array was secured with guy lines anchored to the ground. One stake had been driven into softer soil near an irrigation line where water had pooled after the storm. The base plates had minimal ballast, and no wind action plan had been posted. As the event time approached, Delaney walked onto the stage to make a brief announcement. She moved toward the downstage left area where the lighting tower met the platform. A sudden gust of wind hit the left side of the stage. The vertical truss began to oscillate. The guy line anchored in the soft soil shifted as the stake pulled partially free. The lateral load caused corner bolts at the base to loosen. Witnesses later recalled seeing the tower sway just before the upper clamps gave way. A crossbar clamp near the top slipped. The aluminum segment, roughly 12 feet long and weighing close to 180 pounds, hit with enough momentum to fracture bone and drive her off balance. The bar swung downward toward the stage edge, striking Delaney's shoulder and upper neck with significant force. She stumbled backward toward the stair opening. Her right foot caught on the nosing of the top stair. Her body rotated and she fell hard, her back striking the lower riser. The impact forced the air from her lungs. The tower continued to tilt. A segment of the truss broke free and dropped onto the stage edge, then fell onto Delaney's lower torso as she lay on the stairs. The weight caused immediate visible deformity of her abdomen and pelvis. Bleeding began from lacerations on her scalp and shoulder. The truss shifted again, compressing her chest. Her rib movements became asymmetrical. Her breathing turned shallow and irregular, then agonal. James immediately rushed to her side, established manual airway support, and called for emergency services. Crew members used equipment cases and a pry bar to lever the structure off Delaney's body. Sarah cleared the crowd away. Emergency personnel arrived within minutes. They applied cervical stabilization and controlled external bleeding. A pelvic binder was wrapped around her hips. Oxygen was administered, and she was rapidly transported. In the ambulance, a field ultrasound revealed free fluid in her abdomen, consistent with internal hemorrhage. Her condition continued to deteriorate. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the hospital from blunt force trauma with crush injuries, resulting in massive internal hemorrhage and thoracic trauma. The investigation documented multiple failures. Corrective recommendations included rated ground anchors, proper ballast calculations, and mandatory wind monitoring with shutdown protocols for outdoor events. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.